My beloved child, something changed for this person today, and it happened in such a quiet way that almost nobody around them would have noticed. There was no dramatic announcement, no sudden scene, no obvious moment that could explain the feeling that came over them. Yet somewhere between an ordinary conversation and a few unexpected seconds of silence, your name entered their mind differently than it ever had before. Not as a passing memory. Not as someone they could simply think about and move on from. This time, the thought of you carried weight. And what makes this moment so unusual is that they were not prepared for what they suddenly understood. Don't skip, because the most important part is not that they thought about you. It is what happened immediately afterward. They stopped. Completely. For a moment, everything they had been telling themselves about you seemed to lose its certainty. The explanations they had repeated in their own mind no longer sounded convincing. The emotional distance they had tried to maintain suddenly felt less like strength and more like something unfinished. And in that stillness, one question rose above every other thought: what if I misunderstood what this person meant to me? They did not say it loudly. They may not have said it at all. But the question stayed. And somehow, it led them back through moments they thought they had already understood. There is one detail they cannot stop replaying. It was something small you once did, perhaps so ordinary that you may not even remember it clearly. You gave them space when you could have demanded answers. You showed kindness at a moment when they expected frustration. You remained genuine when it would have been easier to perform, impress, or prove something. At the time, they noticed it without fully understanding it. Today, that memory returned with a different meaning. Suddenly, they realized that some of the things they once considered insignificant may have been the clearest signs of who you really were. Stay till the end, because this is where the story begins to turn. They started comparing that memory with other people, other conversations, other connections they have experienced. And quietly, a pattern became impossible to ignore. With many people, they always knew what role they were expected to play. They knew when to smile, when to speak, when to protect themselves, when to hold something back. But with you, there were moments when they forgot to perform. They could simply exist. Perhaps that frightened them more than they ever admitted. Because being truly seen can feel unfamiliar when someone has spent a long time carefully controlling what others are allowed to see. Then something even more personal surfaced. They remembered a conversation in which you said something that seemed simple at the time. Maybe you encouraged them. Maybe you noticed something about them nobody else had noticed. Maybe you responded calmly when they were expecting judgment. Whatever it was, the exact words are not what matter anymore. What matters is how those words made them feel. Safe enough to lower their guard for a second. Understood enough to stop explaining themselves. And today, they realize they have been searching for that same feeling in places where it never quite appeared. That realization did not make them panic. It made them quiet. There is a difference. This person is not suddenly becoming someone completely different. They are beginning to recognize something they were too distracted, uncertain, or emotionally guarded to recognize before. Something important is waiting for you, because the reason they need you right now is not simply that they miss you. Missing someone can pass through a person like weather. This feels different. What happened today forced them to confront the possibility that the connection they kept trying to define may never have needed a complicated definition at all. Imagine the moment carefully. They are surrounded by normal life. A phone nearby. A familiar room. Perhaps someone speaking to them. Perhaps music playing somewhere in the background. Nothing outwardly extraordinary. And yet their attention keeps drifting back to you. They pick up their phone, then put it down. They open something, close it, return to it again. Not because they are trying to create drama, but because they are considering whether they should finally say what has remained unfinished. And here is the part that may leave you speechless: the message they almost send is not the message you might expect. It is not a grand declaration. It is not a rehearsed speech. It is far more vulnerable than that. It begins with something simple. Something close to, "I realized something today." Those few words carry everything they have not known how to explain. Because what they realized is not merely about you. It is about themselves. For a long time, this person may have believed they needed certainty before they could move closer to anything meaningful. They wanted every emotion explained, every outcome predictable, every possibility arranged safely in advance. But real connection rarely arrives with instructions. Sometimes the heart recognizes meaning long before the mind knows what to call it. And today, they finally noticed how often their thoughts return to you when nobody is asking them to think about you. How often your words appear in their mind during ordinary moments. How your presence seems connected to the version of themselves that feels more sincere, more open, more hopeful. That is what surprised them. You are not simply associated with attraction or curiosity in their memory. You are associated with emotional honesty. And once they noticed that, they could not unknow it. A strange little moment followed. Someone around them may have asked whether everything was okay. They answered normally. Of course they did. But inside, another memory had already begun opening. This one was harder to dismiss. They remembered a time when you seemed distant, perhaps quieter than usual, and instead of wondering only what you were doing, they suddenly wondered today what you might have been feeling. That shift matters. Because for the first time, they are not examining the connection only from their own side. They are imagining yours. They are asking themselves whether you ever waited for clarity they were too hesitant to give. Whether you interpreted their silence as indifference when it may actually have been uncertainty. Whether you carried questions they never realized they had created. And that possibility reached them more deeply than expected. Don't skip, the next realization is the one they were least prepared for. They began thinking about the future. Not some dramatic, perfectly scripted future. Something much simpler. Ordinary mornings. Conversations after long days. Laughing over something unimportant. Sitting near someone without needing to fill every silence. Being able to say, "I'm not okay today," and knowing the other person would understand without turning it into something bigger. And unexpectedly, your face appeared inside those thoughts. Not because they forced it there. It simply belonged there. That was the moment they understood why other possibilities had never fully settled inside them. They had been evaluating connection by excitement, timing, circumstances, even convenience. But deep down, What they wanted was familiarity without boredom, closeness without pressure, honesty without fear of being misunderstood. And whether they had admitted it or not, you had already given them glimpses of exactly that. Now the phone is back in their hand. Their thumb rests over your name. This time, they do not immediately move away. There is hesitation, yes, but underneath it is something stronger than hesitation: sincerity. They know that reaching toward you means giving up one comfortable illusion, the illusion that doing nothing keeps everything safe. Because silence has consequences too. Distance communicates something even when it was never meant to. And this person is beginning to understand that waiting forever for the perfect moment can sometimes cause two people to miss the imperfect but meaningful one already standing in front of them. You don't owe me an immediate answer. I just didn't want more time to pass without being honest. For the first time today, they breathe a little easier. That line feels right. It respects you. It respects the distance that may exist. And it respects the possibility that something meaningful can be spoken without controlling what happens afterward. But there is still one truth they have not written. It is the truth that made them reach for their phone in the first place. Earlier today, this person had a conversation with someone who knows them well. The conversation was not about you at first. It was about life, choices, and how people sometimes recognize value only after becoming distracted by everything surrounding it. At one point, the other person asked a simple question: when do you feel most like yourself? Your person almost answered quickly. Then they stopped. Because the first memory that appeared was connected to you. Not a perfect date. Not some dramatic romantic scene. It was a completely normal moment. You were together, perhaps talking about something unimportant, and they remember laughing without thinking about how they looked or sounded. They remember feeling no need to prove anything. They were simply present. That memory surprised them so much that the person sitting across from them noticed the silence. You thought of someone, didn't you? They asked. Your person tried to dismiss it. But they could not erase the expression on their own face. The conversation moved forward, yet inside them, something had already opened. Later, another question came. What stopped you from being honest with them? This time your person did not answer at all. Because the real answer was not flattering. They had been afraid of uncertainty. Afraid of needing someone emotionally. Afraid that if they admitted how deeply the connection affected them, they would lose control of how the story unfolded. So instead of risking honesty, they chose ambiguity. They told themselves that distance would make everything simpler. It did not. It only made the truth quieter. And here is the realization that leaves them speechless: they are no longer afraid of the same thing. They are not suddenly fearless. They simply understand now that vulnerability is not the loss of control they once believed it was. Sometimes vulnerability is simply telling the truth while allowing another person the freedom to respond however they genuinely feel. That understanding is new for them. It may even be the most mature thing they have learned through everything that happened between you. The phone is still lying where they left it. They return to it slowly. The message remains open. They read from the beginning. I realized something today. I think I finally understand what I was afraid to admit. You mattered to me in ways I didn't know how to express. They stop there. That third sentence almost gets deleted. Instead, they add another. And I think my silence may have made you believe the opposite. Now they feel the emotional weight of what they are saying. Not because the words are dramatic, but because they are precise. This person recognizes that there may have been moments when you questioned yourself because of their inconsistency. Maybe you wondered whether you imagined the connection. Maybe you interpreted their hesitation as a reflection of your worth. Maybe you thought you had cared more deeply than they did. If so, they want you to know something they were never ready to explain before: the distance was not evidence that you meant nothing. Sometimes people distance themselves from the very connection that exposes how deeply they can feel. That does not excuse confusion, but it helps them finally understand their own behavior. Something softer enters their expression now. They are no longer focused on recovering the past. That is important. This is not about recreating some earlier version of the relationship. They know too much time and experience may have passed for that. What they want is something more honest, a new conversation without pretending the old misunderstandings never happened. They want to hear how you experienced everything. They want to listen without defending themselves. They want to know what your life feels like now. Your hopes. Your boundaries. The things that changed inside you while they were trying to understand themselves. And then another strange coincidence occurs. They scroll upward through an old conversation between you. Not very far. Just enough to find something they had forgotten. A message from you. It is short. You had written something like, "You don't always have to figure everything out alone." They stare at it. They remember reading it originally and replying with something ordinary. Maybe a joke. Maybe a thank you. Maybe nothing meaningful at all. But today, those words land somewhere completely different. They suddenly understand that you were offering them emotional safety long before they knew how to receive it. For a moment, guilt tries to enter the room. They do not let it stay. Instead, they choose gratitude. Because regret looks backward and asks what should have happened. Gratitude looks at the present and asks what can be understood now. This person begins thinking about you not as someone they lost, but as someone who changed the way they understand connection. Whether your paths move closer again or simply become clearer, what happened between you mattered. And strangely, accepting that truth removes some of the pressure they had been carrying. They do not need to force an outcome to prove the connection was meaningful. That is when the message becomes simpler. They delete several sentences again. Now it reads like someone speaking instead of performing. I thought of you today because someone asked me when I feel most like myself. You were the first person who came to mind. That surprised me. Then I realized maybe it shouldn't have. They stop. Read it again. A quiet smile appears. For the first time, the message sounds like them. No grand promises. No impossible certainty. Just honesty. And yet their thumb still does not press send. Why? Because one more thing has occurred to them. If you respond, they know the conversation may eventually reach the question they have avoided longer than any other. What do you actually want from me now? They cannot send this message until they know the answer. So they put the phone down one final time and ask themselves that exact question. At first, many answers appear. Closeness. Another chance. Understanding. Forgiveness. Time together. But one by one, they examine each answer until something quieter remains beneath them all. They want truth. If there is still something between you, they want to discover it honestly. If you have changed direction, they want to respect that honestly. If you need time, they want to give it honestly. If you carry questions, they want to answer them honestly. This realization is what makes the moment different from everything that came before. They are no longer approaching you to control the next chapter. They are approaching you because they are finally ready to read it with you. And now something shifts in their posture. The hesitation is still there, but it is no longer in charge. They pick up the phone again. The message is complete. Their finger moves toward send. Then suddenly, their screen lights up before they touch anything. This time, the notification is not random. It is connected directly to you. Not necessarily a message from you, but something that tells them you have also been moving through a change they knew nothing about. And when they see exactly what it is, this person realizes the conversation they were preparing to begin may be completely different from the one they imagined only minutes ago. Then another thought stops them. What if they no longer want to hear from me? It is not fear in the dramatic sense. It is humility. For perhaps the first time, they are considering that your life has continued while they were trying to understand themselves. You may have grown. You may have changed what you are willing to accept. You may no longer be standing emotionally where they last imagined you. And strangely, this does not make their realization smaller. It makes it more respectful. Because needing you right now does not mean believing they are entitled to your attention. It means recognizing that there is something meaningful they no longer want to leave unspoken. The room around them feels different now, although nothing has changed. That is how powerful a real realization can be. The world remains ordinary while something inside a person quietly rearranges itself. They start remembering the way you listened. The way your energy changed when something mattered to you. The little expressions you made when you were trying not to show too much emotion. The parts of your personality they once assumed would always be available to them. And suddenly, they understand something precious: familiarity is not permanence. People should not be taken for granted simply because their presence once felt natural. Stay till the end, because this person's biggest discovery was not that they need you to rescue them, fix anything, or make their life complete. It was healthier and far more meaningful than that. They realized they want to be honest with you. They want the chance to stop hiding behind uncertainty. They want you to know that your presence mattered more than they demonstrated. They want to acknowledge the places where their silence may have been confusing. And they want to know you as you are now, not simply as the version of you they have been replaying in their memories. For several minutes, they begin writing. Then deleting. Writing again. One sentence feels too distant. Another feels too heavy. Another sounds like something they would never actually say. Finally, they stop trying to sound perfect. And that is when the real message begins to appear. I don't know the best way to say this. Then another sentence. Something happened today that made me think about us differently. They stare at those words. Their heart is not racing because of some dramatic event. It is because those words are true. And truth can feel enormous when someone has avoided saying it for a long time. But they still have not sent it. Not yet. Because one final memory has surfaced, and this memory changes the meaning of everything that came before it. It involves the last moment between you when they sensed there was more you wanted to say, but you chose not to. At the time, they thought your silence meant you had nothing left to offer. Today, suddenly, they are wondering whether your silence meant the opposite. Maybe you had already offered enough. Maybe you were waiting to see whether they would finally meet you halfway. Maybe you stepped back not because you stopped caring, but because you understood that genuine connection cannot be carried by one person alone. That thought lands differently. This person looks again at the unfinished message. They realize that reaching out is not about pulling you backward into an old story. It is about discovering whether something new can be spoken with more honesty than before. No guarantees. No demands. No pretending. Just one person finally becoming brave enough to acknowledge what has been sitting quietly inside them. And then, just as they are about to finish the message, something happens that they did not expect. A notification appears. For 1 second, they genuinely think it might be you. It isn't. But what the notification contains brings back a detail connected to you that they had completely forgotten, a detail from much earlier in your story, something that suddenly explains why today's realization arrived with such force. They stare at the screen. They read it twice. And now the words they were about to send you are no longer enough. For a few seconds, this person does not move at all, because the notification has pulled an old moment into the present so clearly that it feels almost impossible to ignore. It is not some dramatic message from the past, and it does not contain anything extraordinary on its own. What makes it powerful is the timing. A photograph, a saved reminder, a familiar phrase, or something connected to a day they had nearly forgotten suddenly appears in front of them, and attached to that memory is you. Not the complicated version of you they have been analyzing lately. Not the distant version shaped by unanswered questions. The real you from a quieter moment, when neither of you knew that the smallest details might someday matter this much. And now something begins making sense. This person remembers exactly how they felt around you during that time. They remember being calmer without understanding why. They remember how easy certain conversations felt. They remember one moment when you said something simple, and instead of replying immediately, they just looked at you because a strange thought entered their mind: this person understands more than I say. Back then, they pushed that feeling aside. Today, they cannot. Don't skip, because what they notice next explains why they need you right now more honestly than anything they were preparing to write. They begin realizing that whenever life became noisy, confusing, or emotionally crowded, their mind often returned to moments connected with you. They had always treated those memories like coincidence. But now they understand that the memories were pointing towards something much simpler. Around you, they once felt emotionally recognized. That does not mean everything between you was perfect. It means there was something real enough to remain meaningful even after distance, uncertainty, and time changed the surface of the story. And as this understanding settles, the unfinished message on their screen suddenly feels incomplete. They delete several lines. They are no longer trying to explain every detail. They are trying to say the one thing that matters most. I think I finally understand what I was afraid to admit. Their finger pauses. That sentence feels vulnerable. Maybe too vulnerable. But they leave it there. Something about today has made pretending less comfortable than honesty. What happens next is surprisingly gentle. Instead of immediately sending the message, this person stands up and walks away from the phone. They need a moment to understand whether they are reaching toward you because they feel lonely, nostalgic, or genuinely clear. That distinction matters to them now. They do not want to place emotional weight on you simply because something stirred inside them. So they test the feeling quietly. They imagine not contacting you. They imagine another week passing, then another month, then perhaps much longer. At first, they tell themselves they would be fine. Life would continue. Responsibilities would remain. Other conversations would happen. But then a deeper question appears: would I regret never saying what I finally understood? And that question changes everything. Because the answer arrives immediately. Yes. Not because they expect a particular response from you, but because remaining silent would mean repeating the same pattern that created this distance in the first place. They realize they have spent too much time waiting for certainty from circumstances instead of offering clarity from themselves. Something important is waiting for you, because this person's need is not about urgency in the way people usually imagine it. They do not need you to solve a crisis. They need an honest moment with you before another layer of silence settles over something that already meant more than they admitted. Then an unexpected memory makes them smile. It is almost frustratingly ordinary. Maybe you once teased them about a habit. Maybe you remembered their favorite drink. Maybe you sent a message at exactly the moment they needed encouragement without knowing what kind of day they were having. At the time, they accepted those moments casually. Now they see something underneath them: attention. You notice things. Not because you were trying to impress them, but because you were genuinely present. That realization touches a place in them that grand gestures never reached. This person begins understanding that some of the most meaningful connections do not announce themselves loudly. They are built through small evidence repeated over time. Remembering. Listening. Returning. Paying attention. Being careful with another person's heart even when nobody is watching. And suddenly, they are asking themselves whether they ever gave you the same quality of attention. The question makes them uncomfortable, but not in a destructive way. It makes them honest. They remember moments when you were speaking and they were already preparing their response instead of truly listening. Moments when your tone changed and they noticed but never asked why. Moments when they assumed you understood how much you mattered without ever actually telling you. They see now that feelings left unexpressed can become invisible to the person who most needs to understand them. And that may be what happened between you. Stay till the end, because the next part is where this person stops thinking only about what they want and starts thinking carefully about what you deserve. They ask themselves, if I reach out, can I do it without making them responsible for my feelings? That single question changes the tone of the entire message. They remove anything that sounds like expectation. They remove anything that might make you feel cornered. They remove the dramatic explanations. In their place, they write something calmer.